You'd have thought they'd have been happy that we'd finally got the right man. Instead, they pushed the blame onto me for James Cooke's death. And it can easily be argued that we've all got Cooke's blood on our hands. Probably 4 years ago at a committee meeting in the dining room next door, Thomas Duccan, who is one of our musical directors, we'd already chosen Iolanthe and he was agreeing to do that. And I said at the end of the meeting, Thomas, have you any ideas as an MD what we could do to celebrate our centenary, which is coming up in a few years' time? And he said, well, if you really want to push the boat out, why don't you write your own musical? And at the time I thought, no, that's not going to happen, that's far too complicated. But the seed was sown.
I was quite cynical about doing it in terms of being able to sell it. The whole process of writing the music and the dialogue, etc., etc. Once we took the decision as a committee to go ahead with it, I was fully supportive.
I think it was the following year, I went to the NODA summer school, NODA meaning the National Operatic and Dramatic Association, and it was a week's residential course, and I'd done those for 6 or 7 years prior to that. And I came across Sarah Osborne, who ultimately wrote the play, and I thought, gosh, you're very talented. You may be able to help us with this musical, or at very least, write a play.
And at that point, he had an embryo of an idea. He knew the story after talking to local historians. He knew which story from Witham history he wanted to focus on. And really, it was a what do we do next? So we had a conversation about possibilities. And at that point, really, a bargain was struck that I would help him make that musical a reality.
In terms of the theme of the story, I'd already spoken to Janet Guyford, the local historian, and she said there were two dramatic events in Witham's history. One was the derailment of the Cromer Express in 1905, which did kill 10 people, so it was dramatic. And the other one was James Cooke, the young farmhand who was hanged for the Witham fires, setting fires to barns and hayricks in 1828 and 1829. But the fires continued after he was put in prison, so he was probably innocent. So we thought we could make drama out of that. There's no way we could put a train crash on Witham stage.
An appointment for me to go through and run a 2-day workshop with WAOS, where I met with interested people from the company to look at the story and think about what version of it we wanted to make. So I designed a workshop that would allow us to think about the themes, to think about the scene structure, the characters that we would focus on, and how we would tell that story in a way that would engage an audience and create a piece of theatre that was valuable and valued.
I heard about the workshop with Sarah Osborne, and knowing Sarah personally as well, I was very excited to work with her. I didn't actually know a lot about the history and about James Cooke, but after that weekend it was very intriguing to learn.
Because I was in it when we first started getting the workshops together, probably about 3 years ago, I think. And it was great to sort of feel it build, ideas, because we split up into groups and came up with ideas. And Sarah, who wrote the thing, she took them all away and built the story around them. But it was nice to see some of the ideas that we had coming into the show.
I think I would term it as authentic. So I think we really thought about what life would be like then and how those events would play in a community. A lot of the characters are real characters, and we did our research alongside historians and members of the community to make sure we had a handle on what part they played in the story. But like anything, in order to adapt something to something else, so a historical account into a musical, you have to take some you have to play fast and loose in some ways. So we invented some characters that would help us tell our story. The character of Betty is entirely our brainchild, because we needed somebody to be looking at it and asking questions about what was going on, and we didn't have an obvious person to do that.
At last the truth emerges from its fetid hiding place. I can write my bitter tale about the wicked human race. Now I have the means to shout of those that are to blame. You should have listened and not slandered James's name.
Wrong place, wrong time, the worst twist of fate. I'm accused of a crime I could not contemplate. In the throes of new love, with everything to live for. Maybe my whole life was leading to this, to her.
So we did invent some characters, we did take liberties with others, but essentially the facts of this man that was arrested on the evidence that we present in the songs and the script, and sentenced to be hung and was killed by the judicial system of the time, that is absolute fact. And the people who loved him, they are represented in there. So I think it's an authentic retelling of the story, if not wholly accurate all of the time.
I offered to direct this musical because I was involved in the workshops with Sarah Osborne, who's our writer, back in October of 2019. And so we spent a whole weekend looking at the history and kind of formulating like the scene structure, deciding where the songs would go, but also looking at all of the characters. And I think we got to like lunchtime of that first day of workshops, and I just kind of knew that this was going to be something really, really special. So I knew I wanted to throw my hat in the ring at that early stage.
Concept to be developing a story around such a significantly challenging time that resulted in ultimately the death of a 16-year-old. But because there was so much history around Witham itself, it was an opportunity that you wanted to be a part of.
It was the first time in any show. It was my first appearance on stage in any type of musical theatre role, full stop. At the grand old age of 49, I decided it was time to give it a shot.
That must have been quite nerve-wracking. Tell me, how did you arrive at that decision?
So my daughter had been involved in the WOW productions, which is the junior version of WAOS, for a couple of years, and I'd been running in support and kind of jealously watching from the edges, kind of thinking, oh, I'd love to do that, I'd love to do that. And basically when Flames came up, I just thought, do you know what, I really, really want to give this a go. And because they were looking for a diverse cast of adults and of younger people as well, I saw it as the ideal opportunity to do it with my daughter. And so that's what we did. We auditioned together, we both got in, and it was just the best 6 months, really was.
Been in the Society 60 years of that 100 years, and I've lived in Witham all my life, so I was almost part of Witham's history as well. So no, it was great, and I was really pleased that I did it. I really was. Well, I mean, we went along to music rehearsals, obviously, but I found learning the lines, I must admit, quite difficult. Most of them I learnt in the middle of the night. I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and these lines would start going over in my head and I'd say, go away, go away. But no, but it did take long, I must admit, it does take longer to learn lines now.
I have to say, kind of the run up to it and the rehearsals just before the dress rehearsal was probably the worst. And I remember feeling really, really anxious in the wings, but you were together with your crew and your team and that sort of stuff, and we had this little thing where everybody put their hands in and we sang Sparks Fly, and up went our hands just before, and as the music started everybody had a jiggle, and then you're on. And just that first time, obviously heart in mouth, just to step out onto the stage, but having done it, got out there, all the nerves just disappeared, and I realised then that it's definitely my new hobby. That's where I want to be. Can't wait for the next one.
Got a bit of kind of Gilbert and Sullivan-esque vibes where we bring in some kind of, you know, old school slapstick comedy. So at those moments I'm kind of looking at the Keystone Cops and your very kind of Laurel and Hardy physical theatre style comedy. And then other times we're just looking at really, really old school kind of acting where we're being truthful and we're kind of using like emotional recall techniques asking all of the characters to create a backstory. So it's kind of like a number of different things have kind of I've put together in a melting pot. But yeah, at the end of the day, I guess my vision is that there's a show that feels really, really truthful, feels historical, but has a kind of a fresh approach to it as well.
Writing a play in Wakefield that's going to be performed in Witham is a geographical challenge. But interestingly, the hardships that lockdown brought meant actually I was able to communicate probably more freely than we envisaged would happen because of the fact that communication opened up through necessity. I think the biggest challenge for me was trying to find a storyline that didn't utterly depress everybody. So that's why James Cooke meets his fate at the end of the first act, as opposed to the whole story being about James Cooke's fate. If we'd left it to the end of the second half, it would have been a very, very bleak musical, and one which people wouldn't have left feeling particularly good about themselves or the human race. So a challenge for me was to tell that story truthfully and not to make light of a situation that was truly devastating and tragic, but also find something hopeful within it. And it's my experience generally that hope comes from communities and from the way that we pull together in adversity. And so the challenge of how do we tell this story in a way that has hope in it actually didn't take too much solving, because I was able to draw on my own experience of whenever something is difficult, if we pull together, we can move forward, and we can move forward in hope.
But I wasn't sure where we're going to find someone who could easily write songs and then orchestrate them. But actually, Frankie Garland, who was a member of our group, I mean, he was in Sister Act, he was in Made in Dagenham, he put his hand up and said, I'd like to do this. And he has a degree in musical composition and so forth. And so I think he put his heart and soul into this and came up with some beautiful tunes. Phil Toms took the tunes from Frankie. They came in the form of electronic music. He transferred it into some other electronic format, and then he was able to play on the piano using different sounds, different instruments, and the software was able to turn that into dots on the page. Jesse Tabor actually agreed to take that on. I take my hat off, because it could have been rubbish. I mean, you know, she wasn't to know. It turned out to be brilliant, but none of us was to know how it was going to turn out.
I'm just missing it so much, and I've never known a show to be so emotional, and I really sort of took to the character and took her to heart and cried every night. Literally every performance I had cried.
The week was absolutely crazy. It was so much fun. It was really nerve-wracking, but by the time we got to the end of the week, we were just so excited to get out there and show everybody in the audience, look at what a fantastic show we've made.
It's just this amazing thing we've made together. It's really different from any other show I've done, where really this is all from scratch. it's all been created by us, and it was just a very happy time to be in the wings, be excited, ready to go on.
I think at first we were unsure how the audience were going to react to that story. Obviously it is a very serious topic, but actually the way it was done and the way that Ree had directed all of those really serious things in the story was really impactful and not triggering in any way.
It was a wonderful show to be in. Very good dramatic show, and I loved that because of the dramatic part of it.
Our dream would be that we're kind of seeing this show be licensed up and down the country. It is a really great piece for amateur performers to do because it has such a big cast of characters, and so there really is something there for everyone. Obviously, you know, if I was kind of blue sky thinking and, you know, no holds barred, it'd be amazing for a professional theatre company to take this on and perform it professionally. I'm not sure if that will ever happen, but that would be the ultimate dream, I think.